The pot's right, so let's move on into it.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. We will be meeting this afternoon on the 800 series rules that we have been working on. We're going to give everybody a short time to get themselves zoomed into our meeting, and then we'll take the roll, and then we'll have a report from staff. All right, it looks like our number has steadied out at about 45, which is great. With that, Hearings Manager Larson, could we please have the roll call?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Bogue.
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner McGowan.
Here.
Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Nanjapa.
Here.
Commissioner Putnam.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 7 out of 7 commissioners present.
Excellent. All right. Well, great to see everybody again. With this, let me sort of set the stage. So we have now taken our party testimony, party participation in the 800 series. We did deliberation in which we provided staff with our feedback on the rules that were presented to us, and then staff had a short period of time to craft a red line rule, as well as redlining the statement of basis and purpose. And we are here today to hear back from staff with regard to the work that they did. And again, that work was, it should not be a surprise to anyone, because it was work based upon direction from the commission to staff. So with that, Director Murphy, you are up, or you and your team are up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners, for the opportunity. And I think today may be one of the more brief presentations from staff, which is wonderful news for me and for those of us who might have a couple of other things to attend to this afternoon. I think the best place to start would be to ask AAG Minor to queue up the document with your direction to us from yesterday, to just take a moment to refresh ourselves about what the asks were to staff. And I think as a reflection of the fact that we're only working with one series instead of multiple series and multiple hearings on those different series, we were able to work on this, take the time yesterday to get extremely focused on these rule changes and SPP changes. And the key rule changes are on this slide, or on this page, 803 F1, the interrelationship between 803 and 304 and what data is being gathered for conversions, and then correcting a typo in Rule 810. I am going to turn it over to Joel to walk through the changes, both in the rules and the statement of basis and purpose, as he worked closely with staff to first identify a solution to the interrelationship of 803 and 304A and the data being gathered that accomplish the Commissioner's directive and is in a manner that works within the existing database and processes for staff. As I flagged yesterday, this could have been a pretty wordy exercise, and so we really wanted to take the time to make sure we thought through the processes. And staff took that time yesterday, and Joel really led that conversation. And he then was able to work through the ultra quick work group, as I colloquially called it yesterday. And he and we spoke with some key parties that were really focused in on this particular issue. And so before I turn it over to Joel to actually walk through the language, I would like to say that I think it achieves 3 really important things. One, and most important, I believe what staff has put together implements the direction that we received from the Commission yesterday. 2 is implementable, which is a very close second. And then coming in, in that kind of three-way tie is that I think that there's cautious or general support from the folks we spoke with, if not, resounding affection for the language that we put together. So they'll have the opportunity to tell you exactly how they feel about it tomorrow. And with that, I would say, AAG Minor, can you walk us through you and Mr. Andrews and the team's hard work?
Thank you, Director Murphy and Mr. Chair. So I will actually start by taking a look at the statement of basis and purpose, where we describe some of the changes in rules in Rule 803B. And I think that's because the primary area where the relationship between the 300 series and the 800 series is addressed is really in the SBP text itself. And so you heard a lot from stakeholders yesterday and on Tuesday about the final sentence there, which you can now see is struck, that language that sort of makes a relatively blanket statement about conversions not requiring a Form 2A. And so staff has revised the language to instead reflect the intent of the commission that whether a Form 2A must be submitted is governed by Rule 304A. So if there is an increase in surface disturbance or there is a significant change to an oil and gas location, then a Form 2A is required. And that is really sort of underscored in this sentence that I've just highlighted on the screen here. And what this means is that conversions of existing production wells to injection wells will be treated the same as any type of proposed Class 2 UIC well. So if there is a significant change to the oil and gas location or there's new surface disturbance, a Form 2A is required. If not, then it's just going to be a Form 2. Staff also clarified here in the next sentence that a conversion is not always going to be a significant change, and whether a conversion is a significant change will really be determined on a case-by-case basis. So staff recognize that some conversions really are just changing whether fluids are going up a well versus down a well, and that doesn't necessarily require significant reconfiguration of the well pad, and it doesn't result in any new off-site impacts. In general, staff recognizes that the conversion from a production well to a disposal well is much more likely to be a significant change than the conversion to an enhanced recovery well. And that's because a lot of the things you heard about, like additional truck traffic, bringing in fluids from other sites, perhaps new pipeline construction, significant new tanks being constructed or reconfigured on the well pad, that's generally more associated with a disposal well than an enhanced recovery well, but that's not true in every circumstance. So staff sort of maintains the flexibility to sometimes require a Form 2A for the conversion to an enhanced recovery well, and sometimes just recover a Form 2 for the conversion to a disposal well. And that determination of how significant the change is will be made on a case-by-case basis under Rule 304A. So I'm going to turn us now to the rule text, in which you can see that reflecting what I just discussed in the SBP, staff has not proposed to really change what's now 803B1. This is the language that just says you need to submit your Class 2 UIC well permit application at the same time as whatever 300 series permit is required. So that means staff will just defer to the 300 series determination in 304A about whether or not a Form 2A is required. And then you'll see on the next part of the screen, we are acknowledging that some conversions of a production well into injection well would not necessarily require the submission of a Form 2A. So just acknowledging that in bold text. But the main purpose of this new Rule 803B2 is actually to implement another directive to staff, and that's the direction about getting information into the CIDR database and also ensuring that the appropriate plans and other information that would come in on a 2A are received by staff. And so going back to the rule language, for all of those conversion wells, everything that doesn't require a 2A and therefore doesn't go through the oil and gas development plan process and require an associated Form 2B with information for the CIDR database, staff is proposing for those conversion wells that otherwise just come in on a Form 2 to require a partial Form 2B, so get some of the data that would ordinarily go into CIDR and not all of it. And the specific parts are those found in Rules 303A5B, Romanets 1, 2, and 6. So Romanets 1 and 2 are essentially emissions data. As you may recall, that first part of the CIDR database deals with criteria pollutants and greenhouse gases, so the sort of air resources component. Subpart 2 is the public health data, including the emissions of hazardous air pollutants that have potential to cause human health impacts. And then subpart 6 is the nuisance information about impacts to noise, light, odor, dust, and recreational and scenic values. And staff, based on hearing the commission's sort of specific concerns there, it seems like those issues of emissions and nuisance impacts were sort of the greatest concerns, to make sure that we're tracking that for all forms of UIC wells. However, staff did not include subparts 4, the terrestrial and aquatic wildlife resources and ecosystems, and 5, soil resources, because both of those are focused on additional surface disturbance and soil disturbance, and there would inherently not be new surface disturbance at anything that doesn't require a Form 2A. So these would essentially just be values of 0 entered on the form, and there's no need to get that information. Similarly, the vast majority of the information required for water resources really only applies to new locations, and so it didn't make sense to require that for these conversions. As part of getting that information on a Form 2B, staff will make an evaluation on a case-by-case basis to figure out what the impacts of the proposed conversion well are and what additional information is needed that would otherwise come in on a Form 2A to evaluate those impacts. And just really recognizing that that's going to vary on a case-by-case basis, staff left this somewhat open-ended, asking for just whatever subset of information or plans required by Rule 304, that's the Form 2A rule, that are necessary to consider the incremental and adverse beneficial impacts of the conversion. So it's determined on a case-by-case basis. In general, that would probably be the cultural distance table, just to figure out how close buildings are, recognizing that perhaps some buildings have been built closer to the well pad since the initial construction of the well. Perhaps a noise plan, recognizing there can be noise impacts, a traffic plan, recognizing there can be traffic impacts, particularly from the disposal well, a cumulative impacts plan to sort of address the cumulative impacts evaluated in the CITER database, and really what other information is appropriate. It's important to note that staff did not use the word Form 2A in the text, and that's to clarify that this is not a Form 2A submission with all of the required information and associated procedures. This is just some of the information that would otherwise come in on a Form 2A. And then finally, this is consistent with Rule 304 D1 that will give staff discretion to exempt operators from submitting certain parts of the information and plans that they would otherwise be required to submit under Rules 304B and 304C if that information is unnecessary. And maybe just one example of that, it's exceptionally unlikely, and I just can't see a situation in which an operator would need to submit an alternative location analysis, which is one piece of Rule 304. And that's because these conversion wells, it's converting an existing location. So the location has already been built, the well is already there. You can't really analyze an alternative location because it is a location that already exists. It's not about sort of moving the well to a new location. The Commission's next direction to staff was to fix the typo in Rule H10. So as you can see, that has been corrected. The prior reference to Rule 712 has been changed to Rule 713, reflecting that the 700 series was renumbered in the Commission's recent 2019 flow line rulemaking. The next direction to staff involved Rule 803F, and this is the seismicity evaluation. Thank you for hopefully not getting dizzy as I move up and down on my screen. And as you may recall, the specific direction to staff there was to sort of address the distinction between the seismicity monitoring that would be required for injecting wastewater into a disposal well as compared to enhanced recovery. So staff has clarified that the sort of baseline standard requiring seismic monitoring is based on the 10,000 barrels per day of injection of water at a disposal well. So again, it's the injection of water and it's at a disposal well, not enhanced recovery. But it was important to staff to still recognize that there are other circumstances where there might be a need for seismic monitoring. That could be if information on a seismic evaluation indicates that seismic monitoring was warranted, and that might be at an enhanced recovery well. Staff does recognize that for the most part at enhanced recovery wells, there's a significantly lower volume of fluids being injected and thus a lower risk of induced seismicity. But for injections of, for example, a gas like carbon dioxide at an enhanced recovery well, it's still important for staff to be able to work with an operator on a case-by-case basis to assess whether there is some risk of induced seismicity. And the problem is that 10,000 barrels per day of water, of a liquid, doesn't really translate well to gases that are a gas at the surface, but could potentially be compressed into a more liquid form when they're injected. So staff worked with operators to come up with a solution that provides sort of the necessary discretion on a case-by-case basis for staff to work with operators for those enhanced recovery wells, while still recognizing that the ordinary rule is 10,000 barrels per day of water at a disposal well. Turning now to the various statement of basis and purpose and guidance edits the Commission instructed staff to make. The first change that staff was instructed to make is to clarify in guidance sort of what constitutes non-produced water. So you can see that on pages 38 to 39 of the statement of basis and purpose. So give me a moment to scroll there. Staff, sorry. Why is this not going to the right page? There we go, sorry. It's right on the page break of 38 to 39. So this is in Rule 808, and staff added the language about issuing guidance about what substances are classified as non-produced water but could still be injected at a class 2 well. The next feedback that the Commission gave to staff was to sort of clarify throughout the 800 series SBP what the use of the term disposal well meant compared to injection well. So staff sort of provided a clearer explanation of that on page 15 as part of the introduction to the whole 800 series, and then made a few conforming edits throughout to be abundantly clear. For the most part, staff had used those terms consistently. The term injection well really refers to all class 2 UIC wells, sort of any well that is injecting fluids, whereas the term disposal well refers to a narrower category of an injection well. So there's essentially two broad categories of injection wells: disposal wells and enhanced recovery wells. So that distinction is now much clearer throughout the SBP. The next direction that the Commission gave to staff was to address sort of some of the questions that were raised by La Plata County and San Miguel County about Rule 801B and whether that is protective of water that is used for domestic uses or could be used for domestic uses. So staff made some clarifying edits to sort of discuss the purpose of Regulation 41 and 42 of the Water Quality Control Commission, which are implemented in Rule 801B, and explain how those standards are protective of drinking water, and that is on page 17 of the Statement of Basis and Purpose. Although not directly instructed by the Commission because of the deliberations that were sort of asking questions about from La Plata County about whether rules 807 and 808 apply to existing wells, staff did clarify the intent that these are operational requirements. They do apply to both new and existing disposal wells in the Statement of Basis and Purpose. So you will see that in both rules. The next instruction from the Commission related to the traffic light system. So in the SVP on page 24, give me a moment to get there. Sorry. Staff did add much more detail about what the traffic light system entails, sort of explaining how it works, what green means, what amber means, what red means, and also sort of specified a little more about the guidance that would be required. So that it should provide specific information about the traffic light protocol, and also that the guidance that staff issues will sort of discuss variances between geologic basins and fields and what that would mean for the traffic light protocol. Turning next to the question of notice and sort of the differences between the 300 series notice and the 800 series notice on page 31 of the SBP, which is actually the section discussing Rule 803 G14. Staff added sort of a longer explanation of the purpose of notice in the 800 series and how that's really intended to notify surface owners and mineral owners about impacts to their subsurface property rights, as opposed to the 300 series notice, which is intended to make sure that nearby residents are aware of potential surface impacts. Staff also made a conforming explanation change on page 34 in the intro section to Rule 804 that similarly describes the different purposes for those notices. While we're on the topic of notice, on essentially the same page, here on page 35, staff clarified that the reason that notice is given to the Division of Water Resources is so that the Division of Water Resources Dam Safety Program can do the necessary evaluation of whether dams are being protected adequately from induced seismicity. And then last but certainly not least, the Commission's final direction to staff related to the aquifer exemptions in Rule 802C. So this is on pages 19 and 20 of the SBP. So I'll just go ahead and get there. And this was the language related to economic and technological practicability, or whether something is economically or technically practical. And staff clarified that one of the reasons that it removed the language about depth and location of an aquifer was in recognition that sort of what groundwater could be used and the economics and technologies of that will change over time, and that just because people don't live in an area right now or groundwater is a little bit deeper than people are using doesn't mean that in the future it won't be used. However, when it comes to whether a formation is so contaminated with hydrocarbons, it is functionally a hydrocarbon formation, an oil and gas formation. Staff did maintain that economic and technical practicality language because sort of the economics and technical recovery of a hydrocarbon is in whether a formation is essentially mostly oil and gas with a little bit of water, and is it economically possible to recover those hydrocarbons? It is a little more important to still think about those considerations compared to the drinking water. And with that, that is actually all of the changes that staff made to the statement of basis and purpose, as well as the rule text. And Director Murphy, Mr. Andrews, and I think are now available to answer questions.
Thank you, AAG Minor and Director Murphy, for that presentation. At this point, we do have an opportunity for questions to our staff. So I turn to my fellow commissioners to see if anyone has questions. Well, AAG Minor, it looks like you did a phenomenal job once again in explaining the edits and incorporating the information and the direction from COGCC commissioners to staff. And I do not see that we have any commissioners with questions for staff at this time. Director Murphy, do you have anything further?
Chair, on 800 series, I would just remind everybody that staff will be available throughout tomorrow to support questions that may come up during closing about what staff has proposed or what staff hasn't proposed, or other, related commissioner questions. And so this is, as with everything else, is never your last shot to ask us questions about it. We'll look forward to hearing from the parties about it. We did get these rules out midday or mid-morning, so hopefully that 24-hour turn was enough, given the pretty targeted changes that were requested and I think accomplished, as I said in my opening remarks. So for 800,
well,
that's.
I think that we express our appreciation to staff and to the stakeholders that you worked with. Really pleased that you were able to achieve looks like some consensus around some of the trickier issues. Great work there, and great work to staff. So I do not believe that we have any other matters for consideration by commissioners today. We will wait and undertake deliberation tomorrow. We're going to adjourn to 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, at which time we will take 3-minute statements from each of the party groups on the red line to the SBB, as well as to the 800 series, and then we would finalize deliberations, I believe, is the role of tomorrow morning. Before we adjourn, can we talk briefly about wildlife and the 1200 series that we are slated to take up next week? Want to make sure that we have thought through what that calendar for next week and maybe even some of the following week looks like. Director Murphy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity. And we staff, maybe I, Julie, haven't put out the information as quickly as we would have liked to in terms of following up on the 1200 series rules with a statement of basis and purpose, frequently asked questions, and revised rules. And we've been working really hard in the background, and it really is a slowdown on my desk more than anybody else's. And so that to me has started to feel like not the best process. And so my recommendation, commissioners, is that staff will be in a place to push out revised rules, statement of basis of purpose, frequently asked questions for the 1200 series tomorrow to get those out to our stakeholders. I acknowledge that that's a really quick turnaround to when we're looking at trying to get to hearing on Tuesday. I think as I look at the schedule, what I would recommend is that we leave public comment as scheduled on Tuesday, and out of respect for our public commenters who have set aside and rearranged schedules to accommodate that. And then Wednesday afternoon at 1 o'clock, we would begin staff's presentation, and that will be a joint presentation from COGCC staff and supported by CPW, who are our subject matter experts, so that you get to hear directly from them about the things that they know the most about and we don't. And then start with party presentations on Thursday morning. And, it gives at least another 2 business days-ish to absorb the information that we're preparing to put out. And I think that as looking at the schedule, we can look at either 8:30 to 5:30 timeframes to build in a little bit more time on those days. But I think that party presentations and commissioner direction to staff would carry through into Monday, which is the 19th. That would give staff the afternoon of the 19th and the 20th, and the morning of the 21st to turn around revisions in coordination with CPW and perhaps any ultra quick stakeholder groups as appropriate. And then staff would come back at 2 o'clock on the 21st. I think I have my days straight. I don't have a calendar right in front of me, to present revisions to 1200 series with party comments starting again the following morning, Thursday morning, or party responses to staff's edits Thursday morning, and moving into commissioner deliberations. I think it affords a little more time on the front end, which I think is appropriate given my delay, and then but keeps us on track. And so that's my pitch. I don't know if I was terribly effective, but that's my suggestion.
Great, thank you. And for the record, not one of the commissioners are willing to accept any apologies on the part of yourself or your staff for delays. You guys have been doing phenomenal work on a number of different series. You're juggling, I don't know how many different balls, and there is no apology needed for the great work that you're doing. Having corrected the record in that regard, I will instruct the transcriptionist to strike all parts of the apology part. I'm kidding. We don't have a transcriptionist, folks, but I'm meaningly, I mean it when I say that. But I think that makes sense. Originally, we were going to go into, I think, party statements after public comment, which would have been Tuesday, Wednesday morning. This would give parties at least 2 additional days to digest the red lines. And so I think that makes sense. From my regard, I also would be willing to start a little earlier and go a little later on Thursday and Friday. But I do want to poll those that have less ability to be flexible. My kids are in college, so so I would ask Commissioner Najapa to think about that. Director Murphy, you indicated that you could do it, so I assume that you've worked that out. Other commissioners with thoughts about this slight revision to schedule? Commissioner Najapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Director Murphy, for the suggestions. I think it all makes sense. I can certainly do an earlier morning, later evening, especially on Thursday, and I could do an earlier morning on Friday, but would probably still need to end by 5 on Friday. But I could go, even up till 6 or later if we need to on Thursday, if that would help to get through more of the parties. But defer to my other fellow commissioners for what works for them.
I thought I saw a thumbs up from Commissioner Messner as well as Commissioner Gonzalez and now Commissioner McGowan. Okay, well then let's adopt that schedule. Hearings Manager Larson, I assume that you'll be able to get that schedule out. Someone in the chat had already wondered about that. Do you want to weigh in on when the schedule could be released so that folks are aware?
Certainly, we should be able to get that agenda out this afternoon.
Great, okay.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question just so it's in my mind?
Yes.
So we're talking about starting on Tuesday, going all day Tuesday, and then starting again on Wednesday at 1 o'clock, and then going Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and so on and so forth. But was there a gap there on Wednesday morning, or?
Yeah, actually there's
enough public comment to go through Tuesday into Wednesday morning.
So the way that Ms. Larson and I and Director Murphy were thinking is that we had previously set up for public comment to start at 1 p.m. on Tuesday. And so we would leave that there because people have made plans and set aside that time. So we would not meet Tuesday morning, but instead have public comment at 1. And that would be all we would do Tuesday is the public comment. And I don't know how many people have signed up, but I believe we should be able to get through public comment that afternoon. And then we would start Wednesday at 1 p.m. and receive just the staff report and then commissioner questions to staff. So that would be Wednesday afternoon. And then Thursday, Friday would be 2, longer-ish days in which we receive party presentations. And then the following, Mimi, help me. The following week?
Sure. So the following week, potentially, if we're able to wrap up on Thursday and Friday with party presentations, which would include party closing statements and closing statements, we would then break until Wednesday. As Director Murphy noted in her comments, we should hold Monday, though, as a spillover day, should we not be able to get through party presentations and party closing statements by Friday close of business.
And then we would undertake as we've done historically, undertake our initial deliberations, initial issue identification, and then there's that break between Monday morning-ish, if that's when we end up doing that, and then Wednesday afternoon for the 48 hours for staff to turn another red line. And then we would reconvene Wednesday afternoon to receive that, and then we would have party presentation, our final closings on Thursday, and then move into deliberation.
Correct.
And again, all of that will be posted fairly shortly on our website and will be emailed out to our parties.
Correct.
Okay. Great. Any further thoughts from commissioners? Anything further, Director Murphy?
No, thank you, Chair. Thank you, commissioners, for your flexibility.
Well, and thank the 73 participants for their flexibility as well. And again, we are undertaking a lot, and we're trying to make sure that we do this correctly, and that does require us to be nimble. And so we appreciate, I guess one thing we haven't really said is I believe my fellow commissioners to my right and left do thoroughly appreciate the vast amount of work product and effort the parties have put into what we're trying to do. It is greatly appreciated, and I think you can see that it is helping to influence these proceedings and the places that we are landing. So I really do appreciate that. With that, I would look for a motion to adjourn until tomorrow morning. That is October 9th at 9 a.m.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. We will see everybody tomorrow morning. Thanks.